Yesterday, a van plowed into a Republican voter registration tent in Florida. The assailant got out of the vehicle, started filming, flipped off the victims. Fortunately, no one was hit, and then fled. Law enforcement says they're not entirely sure this was a politically motivated attack, but I think that's kind of silly. I think we can make a safe assumption that it was. At the same time, there was a massive Antifa protest in Portland. Go figure, it happens all the time. And now one of the top trends in the United States is Antifa terrorists. I think the prospect of a civil war is a real one. And I'm not the only one. I may have been one of the earlier voices saying, be warned, it's possible. And of course, many people in the mainstream media were saying things like Tim's being silly. Bill Maher then came out and said he was going to tone down his rhetoric because the prospect of a civil war is real. And while we haven't seen a whole lot of high-level street clashes, I think the reality is we have gotten substantially closer. If you look at what's going on with Donald Trump, the firing of the people in Washington, Sondland and the Vindman brothers, it seems like we are inching ever closer to an irreconcilable future. I just watched a video about the Civil War. I still have a lot more to learn and read, and of course, one source is never perfect. But I can see parallels between the government changing rules, changing ideologies, and the feeling that one side is either not being represented or being oppressed in some capacity. You have James Carville, the Democratic strategist, saying that 18% of the population is electing 52 of its senators. Bill Maher said the Electoral College is guaranteeing, the Republican victory, and the game is rigged in their favor. To a certain degree, there is some truth about the imbalance in a republic. The Democrats and people like Maher think they're talking about a direct democracy. But it doesn't matter whether they're right or wrong or what should or shouldn't be. What I'm talking about is the prospect of a civil war because two sides refuse to see the other. And I don't blame. It's an impossible thing to solve. I have to admit. You have people who gave a standing ovation to Alexander Vindman. You have others who think he was insubordinate, defying the president. There's no reconciling that difference. Some people just hate Trump so much. They view him as a despot and a tyrant. Now, personally, I think that's insane. They're acting like they're saying on Twitter, we're at the heads on a pike phase of a dictatorship. You kidding me? Trump reassigned some people from the White House, and you're acting like he's literally taking out his opponents. I think they've gone nuts. But it doesn't matter whether they're sane or not. What matters is that they are in stark opposition to what the government does. Then you also have Virginia. For those that haven't been paying attention, what's going on in Virginia is actually one of the scariest things in this country. As the Democratic-controlled state, now with the latest election, has begun very intense and sweeping gun reform, you have sanctuary counties popping up, all too reminiscent of what was going on. Seriously, read up on the first Civil War. And I think we're getting dangerously close. I think gun issues may be one of the catalysts, but it could just be ideology. You have a president that one side views as a literal dictator who can never be stopped. Another side who sees him as being obstructed by either, petulant children of the left who are sore losers or a deep state, whatever it is. Let's read this story and we'll come back to this. I don't want to bury the lead. I know you came here for this main story. From Kiro 7, van plows the Republican voter registration tent, narrowly missing volunteers. Jacksonville, Florida. The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office is reporting that a van drove through the Republican Party of Duval County's tent around 3:45 p.m. while volunteers were registering voters. The Republican Party of Duval County had 6 volunteers at the Kernan Village Shopping Center. An older brown van, driven by a white man in his early 20s, approached the tent, officials said. He then drove right through the table and tent with his van. The driver then stopped, got out of the van, took a video of the scene, flipped off the victims, and fled. As of now, the driver has not been identified. Investigators said that intelligence detectives will be looking to this as an aggravated assault case, as several people could have been seriously hurt. They do not know if the motivation of the driver was political in nature, as the investigation is just starting. We are outraged by this senseless act of violence toward our great volunteers, said Duval GOP Chairman Dean Black. The Republican Party of Duval will not be intimidated by these cowards, and we will not be silenced. I call on every Republican in our great city to stand up, get involved, and show these radicals that we will not be intimidated from exercising our constitutional rights. The Republican Party of Duval County posted on Facebook that it plans to redouble its efforts to register voters. And I'll tell you what, If this guy was truly doing it because he hated Republicans, he just made a huge mistake. Because now regular people who probably aren't registered are getting up and saying, I'm going to. And it's things like this that embolden and empower the Republicans and Trump. But what do you think is going to happen when Trump does landslide this November? Assuming he does. Look, I know we all expect him to. But hubris is what cost Hillary Clinton the election. I think if we actually see moderates and independents overwhelmingly side with the Republicans and give Trump a major landslide, these Antifa types and these paranoid, delusional individuals, like these Antifa people, who literally think the world is ending, they really do. Look, you look at what Greta Thunberg and AOC are saying. They actually think the world is ending. Do you think they're going to sit around and just say, well, the world is ending, Trump won, more and more people are joining the fascists, and I'll do nothing? They're already violent. What do you think comes next? The issue for me is that, when I talk to a lot of people about this, and I have in the past, they say, Tim, civil war will never happen because what you're talking about is low-level skirmishes between like rival political factions or whatever. And the U.S. government is too strong and will never allow it. Is it? Is Donald Trump firing people? Is the U.S. government investigating itself? Yes, that's the scary thing. That there are people in the U.S. government who have been plotting, who have been committing crimes. And I'm not entirely confident the U.S. government can unify. Now, it's as of right now, it mostly is. The political feuds within D.C. are troublesome. But Matt Taibbi, renowned journalist, pretty lefty guy, pretty lefty to say the least, wrote about how we're getting dangerously close to the counting heads phase of a civil war, and he's seen it. And I think he's right. Now, I don't have as much experience as he does with international conflict when it comes to civil war. But the point he made was that it doesn't matter if the federal government is able to stop street violence like this. What matters is that when Donald Trump is being opposed by people working in the intelligence community, which he is, these are the people who filed the whistleblower complaint, accusing him of wrongdoing that was actually not true. We saw the partisan impeachment in which he was accused of no crimes. You see Nancy Pelosi shredding up his speech. There's no real attempt at reconciliation. So here's what the potential is. Someone within the executive branch defies the president. 2 cars zoom out from near the White House towards the D.C., local police. And both at the same time point to the officer or the sheriff or the captain or the chief and instruct them, arrest that man. That's what's scary. Who does local law enforcement side with? In most instances, it'll probably be the president. But it's really about who gets there first and who the target is. This is what Matt Taibbi was writing about. Counting heads. When Donald Trump starts looking to who is loyal to him, and he starts removing those who are disloyal, and the other side starts panicking, they're now accusing Donald Trump of committing a crime for reassigning the Vindman brothers and Gordon Sondland. And there's no real simple way to talk about this. We've had people say, I've seen comments. Why was Alexander Vindman's brother also reassigned? And I think it's actually a really, really simple and obvious reason, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is that perspective will be weaponized. Right now, many people on the left are saying Trump is retaliating against family. He is trying to show you that if you defy him, you will be removed. Oh, please. You serve at the pleasure of the president, right? They don't care. They don't see it that way. The entire impeachment process was, at least in the beginning, arguing that Trump was supposed to operate as to what a low-level staffer on the NSC had to say. Not true at all. The president is the leader of the executive branch. He's the commander-in-chief. Just because some low-level NSC advisor says, here's what you should say, doesn't mean he has to. But they think the president does have to. Take a look at the impeachment. Congress said Trump obstructed Congress. Trump did not. Trump has executive privilege. It's called checks and balances. The Supreme Court should resolve the dispute. It's how the country was formed. But the Democrats don't care. They view themselves as having the right to supersede the executive branch. That's not how it works. There's no reconciliation. There's no resolution. Because right now the left is saying Trump got away with it. And there's nothing that can stop him. The rhetoric is escalating. The panic is getting worse. And then we see more things like this. So I'll tell you what. I'm not super concerned for what it means that a man in a van ran through a tent. I'm very worried about the people who are doing these things. You know, the voter registration people. I'm concerned for their health and safety. This is one moment. It scares people. We don't know when or what the catalyst will be. But I'll tell you this. It's not a fringe position to be concerned about the escalation towards a civil war. And I implore you, you really should read about what started the civil war here and in Spain, because there are a lot of common themes, and it really does feel like we're marching in that direction. Bill Maher, one of the most popular and mainstream personalities in politics, said the same thing on more than one occasion. We are getting dangerously close, and I really do think so. But I don't think it can be stopped. You know, Bill Maher called Steve Bannon evil the other night. I'm not kidding. Steve Bannon said, look what they're doing to Bernie. Look what they're doing to Trump. Look at the media. You need to learn from this. At the end of it, Bill Maher said, I wish we had someone as evil as you. And while there is some air of civility in that, like it's kind of joking, a lot of people really do view it as evil. I assure you, there is no convincing many Trump supporters that Adam Schiff was acting nobly to go after the president the way he did. And personally, I don't think he was. I think it was a partisan attempt at seizing power. But it doesn't matter what we think. What matters is that there are millions of people who think that the only thing, the only person trying to stop the evil tyrant is Adam Schiff. They have this perspective on strategy that literally makes no sense. They think that Nancy Pelosi ripping up that speech was a good thing. It doesn't matter what actually happens. It matters they think it worked, even though it doesn't. From my perspective, not being policy-wise, I'm a bit of a moderate, more on the populist side. So like Trump or Bernie are preferable to the elites. But I look at, Trump as being the president, as this is how elections go. The left doesn't see it that way, and they won't change their minds. Everything they hear is orange man bad. One of the most terrifying functions, or I should say, escalations in whatever's happening is how the media is making everything worse on purpose. Now, they'll get mad at me for saying that, Trump is the president. He's allowed to do these things. Calm down. It's not that bad. They'll say I'm right wing for the things that I say. But let me make one thing very, very clear. I am actually desperately trying to hold things together. And the reality is Trump is the president, and he's not really doing anything that's worse than many other presidents. There's a lot of things the executive branch needs to be pulled back on. I can absolutely respect that. But what I'm seeing from the left, from Democrats, is it's chaotic, it's destructive. The party itself is being torn apart. You have the moderates at war with the progressives accusing each other of cheating. At a certain point, it might not have anything to do with Donald Trump. As I stated a couple days ago, in 2021, when people are rioting in the streets, it's not necessarily going to be because Donald Trump was reelected. It's going to be because Bernie Sanders was cheated for a second time. The Civil War is not so much about left and right, but a collapse of political cohesion. I think one of the things we might see after watching this video on the Civil War is that Donald Trump wins, and he wins by a lot. I could be wrong about this. I'm not trying to make a hard prediction. I'm just telling you based on what we have right now, here's what I think. Donald Trump wins. He wins by a lot. Moderate voters flock to Trump as the Democrats fall into chaos. Pete Buttigieg is being accused of hiring Shadow Inc. to help him steal the election. Precinct captains across Iowa are reporting their results are wrong. What the IDP and the DNC are reporting, it's wrong. It doesn't reflect the actual votes. Dare I say it, it seems like, at least from their perspective, from the perspective of these individuals, the Democrats' establishment are cheating once again. So what do you think happens when, once again, Bernie Sanders doesn't get the nomination? I think a lot of people are going to see the chaos in Iowa. Fears of this repeating itself in Nevada, maybe even New Hampshire, are bubbling over right now. A lot of people are happy with the economy, and a lot of people are going to vote for Trump. And I've already heard some of the rhetoric bubbling up. You know what they're saying? I was told that I need to understand everything Trump is doing with the economy reflects perfectly World War II Germany. Trump is securing the borders. He's all about nationalism. He's building up the military. He's bolstering the economy, getting people really, really excited and rallied behind him. And then those people flock to vote for him. As the Democratic Party collapses, you then see the Republican Party under Donald Trump become a supermajority. Maybe even getting 70 or 80 million votes because nobody wants either Biden or Bernie. Whatever happens. you'll end up with tens of millions of people who feel oppressed, like their voice doesn't matter. They're already blaming the Electoral College, saying the system is corrupt and it's rigged against them. What do you think these people do? I'll show you what they do. Because here's the next story. Andy No tweeted out this video. Video recorded by Antifa writer Shane Burley shows the mob harassing, assaulting, and pepper spraying local citizen journalist Brandon Brown. Brown was attacked and robbed by Antifa militants for recording them in Olympia in December. Right now, Antifa terrorists is a top trend on Twitter because a lot of people are pointing out that these roving bands of black-clad individuals beat people and rob them, and you can see it right here like they're doing to this man, like they did to Andy No. But a lot of people champion Antifa, especially in the media. They have repeatedly tried to run cover for them. Now, I don't know if that will bolster their ranks, but here's what I kind of feel like might happen. The media cheered for Antifa over and over again and lied. They claimed that Vashiva in Boston, an Indian man, okay, and his supporters holding up signs saying Black Lives Matter too. They claimed that was a Nazi rally. I'm not exaggerating. That was in Boston. 40,000 people showed up to protest. These kinds of media lies championing Antifa and their extremist tactics will result in a large group of young people absolutely believing that Antifa are the good guys fighting the fascistic system. They absolutely think there are Nazi rallies happening all around them. There aren't. But what happens when you completely marginalize a large portion of progressive voters, the ones who actually defend and root for Antifa and excuse their bad behavior? When Donald Trump wins over the moderates, and I believe he likely will, again, these are just my thoughts based on current events. Okay, if you watch this a month from now, things could be very, very different. Based on what we're seeing with a van plowing through a Republican voter registration tent. It seems to me that many of these progressive voters and people on the left will view the system as corrupt. They already do. The Democratic establishment would rather give Trump a victory than allow Bernie Sanders ever the possibility of revolution. Bernie Sanders calls it the revolution. And how does the saying go? Those that make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. And that's what a mantra that many of these people actually live by. I'm not saying they're going to win, but I'm saying we will start seeing an escalation of political violence to a degree you are not prepared for and you would be terrified by. Now, I don't know if we'll actually see a real civil war, but watching these historical videos was kind of eye-opening. One of the key factors that I saw when I was learning about the Spanish Civil War and the American Civil War was a feeling, or was this phenomenon where you had two distinct ideological factions that were constantly doing a tit for tat back and forth over what's fair. Oh, we're definitely seeing it. Absolutely. Especially with the Second Amendment. You've got, I mean, you look at Donald Trump right now and the impeachment and the scandals. There is no, what's happening in Washington has little to do with policy. What's happening right now has nothing to do with policy. And I'm probably a really great example of that. Which brings me to my greatest fear. We're in it. I said this several years ago. They might write in 50 to 100 years because hindsight is 2020. The Second American Civil War began, September 17th, 2011. Occupy Wall Street. I don't know. We might not realize that we're in it because history is condensed when we read about it. We see, on this date, this thing happened. And then they say on this date, this thing happened. And there could be a 6-month gap in between. But I think based on the fact that the fight in Washington and in politics has almost nothing to do with policy, we have opened the door. The roller coaster has already apexed and we are heading down. Or perhaps I should say, we are climbing to the top. The roller coaster is moving and there's no getting off this ride. But let me break that down. Let me explain this. If the issue were policy-based, to an extent it is, but if it, for the most part was, if they said, I do not like that you want to tax cut these things, you want to put tax cuts in these areas. We need more public funding. We'd have a discussion about it. See, I tend to be in favor of social programs. I do think it's fair to concede in some areas to those I disagree with because I believe in compromise, to live peacefully. And I also think that government programs can become bloated and corrupt and need to be cleaned out every so often, but I actually do like these ideas. I actually am concerned about some of the policies of Donald Trump pertaining to foreign policy, as well as, the ever-increasing debt, plus the things we're seeing from the Fed can be a little worrying. No one's talking about those things for the most part. The conversations being had are whether or not Trump is an evil dictator or he's not an evil dictator. He's the God emperor of the United States. That says to me, the battle has nothing to do with the way the country is being run. It has to do with how much each side hates each other. That's why someone will plow a car through a tent. They don't care what you believe. They don't care what your policy ideas are. They care about their tribe winning. And that's when we get to a point we can't come back from. My policy positions lean left in many ways. In fact, I begrudgingly am for the Second Amendment. Begrudgingly. And I've talked about this. I used to actually talk about how I think there's compromise in gun control and that we should have certain, regulations and rules. And then people pointed out the Constitution is for everybody. And it was a good argument. It really, really was. And so I said, okay, I agree. The first step is amending the Constitution. Likely not going to happen, especially on 2A, but I can accept that I don't rule the world. So I can be certainly upset. And I shrug and I say, I'm not the most powerful man. Nobody is. And the government was created to keep a balance. I like my First Amendment, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and I respect the Second in many ways. So that's where my position fell. We have to have some kind of guiding principles to keep us unified. And if that means I lose some battles and win some others, I'm actually happy. Because I respect that. We're not having these conversations anymore. Now, certainly, Virginia could be a catalyst, and that is policy-based. But for the most part, the anger that will rile up people to find themselves in the street has nothing to do with policy. It has to do with whether or not the other side is virtuous or evil. On one side, they say Antifa are the great defenders of freedom. They run articles about it. Now, you see many people on Twitter and social media saying Antifa are just terrorists who beat and oppress people. Donald Trump is the evil orange man or he's the God emperor. He's either a criminal who's committing crimes over and over and over and over again, or he's the savior of America fighting the deep state. I know those are extreme positions, but that's the point. Certainly there are some people who grumble and say, oh, I don't like how Trump did this thing. And certainly there are, conservatives who say, hey, Trump's policy on here has really worked out well. There are still many Americans talking about policy arguments. But many people are becoming disillusioned with the system as a whole, believing that there is no chance to succeed. There is no way for their ideas to be heard. And that's where it starts to get dangerous. And I think this is why you can see the perspective of Bill Maher in believing a civil war is possible, nay, likely. When he told Steve Bannon, 1, you're evil, and 2, the game is rigged against us, and then says civil war is possible, he's right. Not because it's going to be started by one side or the other, not that he's predicting that, but that many people on the progressive left see the Democrats sort of cheating them, taking away their possibility of having their voice heard, and seeing no alternative to the evil of Donald Trump. What do? They plow a car through a registration tent. They scream violent threats. They attack people in the street. And that's just the beginning. When this starts to reach the level of the federal government is when the roller coaster hit that apex and we start going downhill faster and faster with no end in sight. Like I said, Matt Taibbi mentioned the counting heads phase. But the better depiction is this. Let me just wrap this up. Right now, you have low-tier violence over the past few years and an escalation towards street combat. I warned there could be a civil war. Don't know if it's going to be absolutely likely. Maybe something happens. There's always new variables. And I had people say to me over and over and over again, Tim, it'll never happen because the federal government won't allow it. Donald Trump is firing people. We've seen the texts between Page and Strzok. We've seen the fake FISA reports, the phony FISA warrants. You think this government is unified in the executive branch to actually go after these people? They are not. Now, Bill Barr has changed some rules. Durham is doing his investigation. But what do you think happens when the left says those people are Trump cronies who are evil and they are corrupt just the same as Trump and they view every action as the encroachment of fascism? There are people in the government who agree with them. Perhaps why Donald Trump fired some of them. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know the answer. But when it comes down to this. We've seen the street violence. Many shrugged it off. I wasn't looking at an escalation of street violence. People were so, small-minded when it came to these issues. They're thinking the Proud Boys versus Antifa is meaningless. They're just fringe factions fighting each other. I wasn't concerned that we would see 1 million Proud Boys fighting 1 million Antifa. Not at all. I was concerned about this ideological split infecting our institutions. Now we have Vindman. We have the impeachment. It was totally political, no crimes committed. They just want to get rid of Trump by any means necessary. And Trump resisted. Who's right? Depends on where you're standing. For me, I think the president has a right to do a lot of things. And I don't think he's been necessarily worse than many other presidents aside from his behavior. Because when it comes to foreign policy, I'll be as critical as I am of him as of Obama in a lot of ways. Drone strikes, for instance. But I'm not surprised the president does this, and I don't think the solution is to burn it to the ground. But when you have, maybe 10 million progressives who demand their voice be heard, but also believe insane things that we would never agree with, there's no solution. There's no negotiating with Antifa. There's no telling them why they're wrong, and they will say the same to you. And when that point comes to government, that's when we start counting heads. That's when people make that demand. Arrest this man. The firing of Vindman should be very, very terrifying for all of you. Not because he should or should not have been fired, but the fact that we're at this point. He testified against Trump. They're now accusing Trump of retaliating against a witness. I think there's a big difference between an insubordinate employee and retaliation against a witness. They say that his brother should not have been fired, but the simple reason is they're family members who share secrets and talk, and there's a potential conflict of interest there. So maybe reassigning them was appropriate. Doesn't matter, though. Literally doesn't matter. There will be no end to the claims that Trump is evil or has broken the law. It will never stop. On social media, we can't even say a certain name of the person involved. But the Republicans are investigating. They're going to call these people as witnesses most likely. And now the Democrats are claiming Trump has won because of the cronies in the Senate, elected by 18% of the population, and is now using this power to seek political dirt on all of his Democratic rivals. That Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham are digging up in papers, reaching out to the these executive branches to dig up dirt on political rivals and damage their campaigns so that the Republicans can guarantee their victory when only 18% elected them in the first place, as Bill Maher said. The game is rigged, and now the Republicans are cheating, they say. Do you think this ends with them sitting on their hands saying, it's fine, we give up? It's fine, we'll wait again? Or do you think when we hear what Project Veritas released, with Bernie Sanders' campaign staffer saying nightmarish things about putting Republicans in camps, do you think we finally reach that point soon? We can't tell. Hindsight is 20/20. I wish I could predict the future. Sometimes I look back and think it was so obvious this would happen. Why couldn't we see it? Because there are just too many branching forks in front of us. We don't know which path we'll end up going down. But I think the recipe is here. I think the ingredients are here. And I think we've opened the door, we've gotten on this ride, and we've gone up. My final thought. The fight in Washington has nothing to do with policy. One side says Trump is evil. One side says he's the savior. That should be enough for the rest of you to understand what I'm trying to say. There is no arguing whether someone is not evil or is. You can't argue it because there's nothing to literally argue. It's a subjective moral question based on either 10 years of lies or 10 years of truth. So if the media told you all of this insane nonsense, and we know a lot of it was fake news. The Intercept, for instance, has an article about 30 different times the media put out information accusing Trump and then had to retract it a day later. No matter how many times these stories come out, the lie travels halfway around the world before the truth straps on his boots. That could be true for any faction, but all that matters is the paranoid fracturing in reality exists. Trump is either an evil mafioso who can't be removed. You've got people saying Trump might not leave office. They're warning it. Bette Midler thinks a joke is real. Donald Trump is saying he'll never leave. What do you think they're going to do when Trump wins again? Maybe it all just blows over. Maybe we've faced more trying times in the past. Maybe I'm overreacting. I don't know. Check out some of these Civil War videos. You'll see the parallels. And if history has taught us anything, is that those who forget it are doomed to repeat it. And those, yes, we have to learn from the past in order to avoid these things. So I'll leave it there. But I'll leave you with one final thought. A man just drove a van through a voter registration tent, jumped out filming, flipped him off, and fled. I think it's coming. I don't know in what form. We're in the digital era. It could be very different. We have an international community that could be more involved. We have major corporations. But it seems like Facebook might be taking the side of Trump. So what happens then when Trump wins and unifies most of America against a ever increasingly radical faction? I got to do one more. I know I keep saying one more, but think about this. If Antifa is just a fringe group of wackos and Trump does landslide heavily and win a bunch of moderates and starts using law enforcement to go after these violent terrorists, some people have said that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. If you've watched Star Trek, for instance, Data asks Picard about it. I know maybe many of you don't care about Star Trek, but he brings up a point about how many rebellious factions have used these tactics to great victory. What happens when Trump's law enforcement goes out? We start seeing heavy-handed videos and propaganda. People become convinced that Trump is doing wrong, and Antifa uses that to recruit and expand and destabilize everything. I'll leave it there. Stick around. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. I'll see you all then.